Once again, I have been tagged. Welcome to Matt on Books, where I talk about fantasy mostly, science fiction sometimes, and comics occasionally. The end of the year is always one of those things where you start thinking about how the year was, how the next year might be, and to assist a little bit in that, I've been tagged by Josh, my friend over at Red Fury Books. Link down in the description as usual. He did this tag and he tagged 3 Matts, and I'm one of them. So this is the Postscript tag, where you look back at the year that was and what you read and what you liked and maybe didn't as much. So let's get on with it, shall we? So the first question is actually 2. It's the longest book I read this year and the one that took me the longest to read, which may not be the same. In my case, they are not. Look at that. I read that this year. That is The Stand by Stephen King. Before I started the channel, I wanted to reread and finish reading The Dark Tower. I had read the first 4, I think, books of The Dark Tower already years ago before the rest of them were out. And I remember I really liked it. It's probably the most original fantasy series that I've ever read. Not only fantasy, hard to categorize, but I'd also heard from all of the King fans. I haven't read that much Stephen King, and lots of people had said The Dark Tower ties into everything, and I didn't want to read everything to get all the tie-ins, but the main things I heard it tied into were The Stand and Salem's Lot, which I haven't read yet, but I do have it back there on my shelf. So I read this so that I could finish reading The Dark Tower and get all of the connections. And there are a few connections. It was pretty interesting, but the book itself, if you don't know it, post-apocalyptic, cast of thousands, not thousands, but many, it goes all the way across America, almost all the way across America, and it's an excellent character story. In a way, kind of like The Walking Dead. There are no zombies, but it's a group of survivors banding together and surviving together. And I really enjoyed it. So that was the longest book I read. It was not the one that took me the longest to read. This is the book that took me longest to read. I'm sort of cheating. If you know my channel, you know that I'm rereading Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I reread this year. But the first time I read it, the first time I started it was in 2001, and I DNF'd it. I did not get into it. And then I think about 2010, I tried again and I DNF'd it. And then last year, I read it and I finished it. So I guess it doesn't count in a way, but it took me a very long time, 20 years, 21, 22 years, to read this book, and I'm so glad I did. It is so good. It's a series that is maybe the definition of not for everyone, but it's definitely for me because I reread it this year. Amazing series, Malazan Book of the Fallen. The second question is a book I read this year that was outside of my comfort zone. So lately, my comfort zone has certainly been fantasy. I've been reading stuff with dragons and swords and magic and stuff. And this year, I went back to one of my favorite authors who I haven't read in a long time, Paul Auster. And I read Invisible. Invisible is a story with no magic or swords or dragons. It's about some well-educated people who live in New York. And they're strange and their relationships are strange, but it's certainly not fantasy. It's not even magical realism. It's just normal people interacting in New York, like most of Paul Auster's novels. But it was very, very good, just outside of my usual reading. Third question is, how many books did I reread this year? Because I've been doing these sort of consistent Malaz everything read, I reread 5 or 6 books of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So that I reread the first 4 books of the Dark Tower and then went on to read the rest of them. That was before I started my channel. I read the Book of Jerrig, which I've got back here. Actually, it's probably off camera. It's by Stephen Brust. It's fantasy for sure. It's a kind of crimey, heisty, criminal underbelly kind of story. It's pretty old. It's got pretty flat characters. That was a reread, so I was coming back to it after having not read it for about 10 years. But it's got a very interesting story, and if you like the crimey, planning, heist kind of stuff, you might enjoy it. I reread Dune this year, only the first book, but I reread Dune. So I think that's about 11 or 12 rereads, something like that. Fourth question, my favorite reread of the year definitely goes to Memories of Ice. It's the book which I would have said in my first read was my absolute favorite Malazan book. It's got more epic scenes than any other Malazan book I can remember, except maybe the last one, The Crippled God. Memories of Ice, a lot of things from the first 2 books come together. The characters are amazing. The action is stunning. There are 2 huge battles which just, like, you need to plan when you're going to read them because you won't be able to put the book down until you finish that battle. And some of them take a little while because there are a lot of people involved. Such a good book. This book itself is almost worth reading the first 2 books for if you just want to get to a really, really amazing book. The first 2 are also very good. I'll grant that. But this one is the best. It's so, so cool. Question number 5, a book I read this year that I already look forward to rereading. I would say that would have to be The Counselor by E.J. Beaton. I did a review of this. Go back and have a look if you're interested. It's a very original character story. The world is maybe not super original. The story is not necessarily super original, but the characters are excellent. I'm not saying the world or the story are bad. I really, really enjoyed this book. I loved this book. But it's really much more about the characters. And the main character, Lysand, is super interesting. Super, super interesting. She is drug addicted, highly educated, and responsible for choosing the next king or queen of the kingdom. And yeah, just an excellent book. I will definitely reread it because this is a duology, or will be a duology. I've been in touch with the author, E.J. Beaton, and they are taking a little detour. They're working on a Greek mythology gender-flipped retelling. That'll be the next book. I think it comes out next year. When they're going to get back to this one or the second book of this, I'm not sure. But when they do, it might be a couple of years. So therefore, I will probably reread this before I read the second book because I have a crap memory. So I'll definitely reread The Counselor. Sixth question. Favorite single short story or novella I read this year? I didn't read any short stories. I couldn't remember any. I'm pretty sure I didn't read any short stories. But I did read a novella, and it was a Malazan novella. My Malaz everything read is everything written for Malazan by Erickson and Esselmont in concurrent publication order. In concurrent publication order means also the novellas, which are included in the collections of Beaucaland and Corbel Broach. There are 2 books. This one has 3 stories in it. I read the first one first, Blood Follows, and it's kind of an origin story. It's not really 100% an origin story. If you know Beaucaland and Corbel Broach from the Malazan Book of the Fallen, they remain mysterious, but you learn in these stories, you learn a little bit more about them, get a bit more of an idea of their character. And the first one is more of an origin story in that their manservant, who appears in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Amansapor Reese, it's explained how they got together, how he started working for them in Blood Follows. And it's an amazingly tight little story, just like Malazan Book of the Fallen, lots of characters, and it all comes together for a huge conflict at the end, which was pretty amazing. So I loved Blood Follows. 7th question, Mass Appeal, a book I liked and would recommend to a wide variety of readers. This was also a reread for me. I kind of like rereads. And it was actually a listen. It wasn't a read. I was experimenting with audiobooks, and I decided that something I'm familiar with and like a lot would be a good thing to listen to. So I would recommend The Hobbit to anyone. It's kind of amazing to me. Before I got on BookTube, I assumed pretty much that anybody that reads fantasy would have read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And then I met a lot of young booktubers who, of course, have a very different perspective than an old person like me. The Hobbit was the first kind of adultish novel I read. It's not written for kids, but it's more written for kids than Lord of the Rings is. It's got a lot of light and funny things in it, but it introduces the world of Middle-earth. It introduces some of the characters that turn up in Lord of the Rings as well. And I definitely recommend it to anyone. It's very easy to read. It's not very long. And the audiobook that I listened to, which is the narration by Andy Serkis, was excellent. He did the body acting and voice acting for Gollum in the movies. So, of course, he's good at this, especially when Gollum turns up in here. His voice is so excellent. So, yeah, everyone should read The Hobbit for sure. 8th question is Specialized Appeal. A book you liked, or I liked, but would be hesitant to recommend to everyone. That probably goes to Gardens of the Moon again. I'm such a Malazan fan. I would recommend Malazan, and this book particularly, to anyone. But I also understand that it's not for everyone. Some people I know, like Madison, love a lot of the books I love, but didn't love this or Malazan in general. It's a very specific kind of series. Go back and have a look at my review of Gardens of the Moon, where I talk more about that. But I totally understand why this does not click for everyone. So I would recommend it to anyone who's been reading fantasy for a while and is looking for something maybe a little more complex than some fantasy, and that doesn't follow the typical tropes all the time. But I wouldn't recommend it to someone who's just getting started in fantasy, for example. Although people like Varsha from Reading by the Rainy Mountain channel didn't read fantasy, and she started with this, and it worked for her very well, apparently. So yeah, this one would be my not necessarily recommended for everyone book. Question number 9 is reflect on your year as a bookish content creator. First of all, it hasn't been a year. I started this channel in August. I was unemployed and I don't have a family. So I had a lot of time all of a sudden to do whatever the hell I wanted. And I put a lot of that time into getting the channel going. And I was really happy with how it went. considering that I started in August and it's now beginning of December, I have 500 something, 520 maybe subscribers, which is kind of cool. I don't honestly care that much about the numbers. What's been a lot more important to me is meeting people and having a group of people who are as excited as I am about books. And that has definitely been working. I've done a number of collaborations, which I'm super happy about. The first one was very spontaneous. AP Canavan, A Critical Dragon, he invited me on his channel to talk about the Rings of Power because I disagreed with some of his takes. And we had a very civil, sensible discussion about the differences of opinion, which is a rare thing on the internet sometimes. Herr Professor Dr. Fantasie, Philip Chase, he had me on his channel for Dear Dr. Fantasy. I still haven't convinced him to change the name to Dear Herr Professor Dr. Fantasy. But that was a great chat. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, AP. Just recently, Joanna had me on her channel for Why Read with Angela from the channel Do Unicorns Read? And we had an excellent chat as well. And I started my regular chat, live chat series called Friends on Books. And the whole point of that, in the back of my head anyway, it could really be called right now, it could be called Making Friends on Books, because I'm new to this. A lot of people don't know me. A lot of people have already been friends for 2 years or longer, and I don't know all of these people and I want to meet them. So I'm just inviting people that I really like their channels on my channel to get to know them a little bit better and have a chat. And that's been working out really well. I had the first one with Philip and AP and Josh. The second one with Jordan and Joanna and Tori. And the third one just recently with Theo and Andrew and Alex. And all of them have been a ton of fun. I will continue doing those at least one a month. That's my plan. Otherwise, I sort of struggled a little bit when I got a job. Getting a job was good, of course. And suddenly I didn't have all the time in the world to do whatever the hell I want. So I had a real dragging period where for a couple of weeks I didn't put out any videos. And I think I've found the balance of it now, where I can pre-produce a few videos on the weekend. And I'm aiming to have 2 videos every week ongoing. And then maybe occasionally a third one when I have something particular that comes up. But I think it's been going well. I was a little worried about it when I started my job and I wasn't really producing any videos. And I felt a bit down about that, to be honest, and maybe a little bit under pressure. Just from me, I was putting myself under pressure, obviously. But I think I've calmed down about that. I've got a pretty good plan now that in a weekend I can shoot 2-3 videos. I can get ahead of my schedule and I can keep up with 2 videos a week. Over Christmas, maybe I'll do a bunch of extra ones because I've got a week or 10 days off. And I don't really have any family in Germany, so I'm not doing anything spectacular. I'm not traveling anywhere and doing anything specific for Christmas. So I will pre-produce maybe all of my January videos in the Christmas break. We'll see. The coolest thing about having the channel is just that I've been reveling in my own love of books. I had my new bookshelf built. I have been filling up my new bookshelf. It will probably be full sooner than I would like. And I've just been talking to so many people that love books. I've been having these live chats with people, with you guys in the comments. All of this means a lot to me. For many, many years, I didn't really have anybody in my life that I could talk to about books because some of them read stuff, but not the stuff I read. So it's been such a joy getting to know people on BookTube, getting to know people who have subscribed, other booktubers, and just having bookish content and communication and chats going on constantly. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Last but not least question, tag some fellow bookish content creators. So I don't know, I'm always a little hesitant to tag people because tags are fun if people want to do them. So no pressure, but I am tagging Joanna, name of her channel as well, Philip Chase, also the name of his channel. I don't know if I've ever seen Philip do a tag video, so don't feel obliged, Philip, but it'd be cool if you did it. And Bryce from Shelf Centered, that's the name of his channel. All three of them, you've been tagged. All of the channels I mentioned will be linked down below as usual. I'm curious, you, the viewer, what would be your answers to these? What have you read this year? What are you looking forward to rereading? What would you recommend to anyone? Especially that one I think is interesting. Like, what would be the fantasy book that you would recommend to anyone and expect that they probably will like it? Answer that down in the comments. And as always, I hope you're well and keep reading awesome books. And I'll see you next time.